My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the Noble Lady Baroness Scott of Needham Market and to very much agree with the Noble Lady about the importance of parish and town councils. And in travelling around the country, as I often do, you see so much of them stepping up to the plate, where the larger scale authorities, the principal authorities, have simply not been able to continue, have not had the funds. And that's crucial, the kind of things I've seen, whether it's keeping public toilets open, whether it's managing areas of grassland, whether it's keeping even tourist centres open, it's the kind of thing that I've seen. Like other Noble Lords, I begin by thanking the Noble Lord Shitley for securing this absolutely crucial debate. There really is hardly anything more central to the declining quality of life in the UK, the kind of broken Britain that we were talking about when we were debating the budget, than the facts of how much local government is struggling. I should declare my position as Vice President of the Local Government Association and the National Association of Local Councils. And we're coming up in April to about 75% of councils making the maximum increase that a government allows, according to the County Council network. That means, in reality, for Band D average properties, a £99 increase to bills going to over £2,000 a year. At the extreme, where things are absolutely desperate, the obvious example is Birmingham Council. They're looking at a hike of council tax of 21% over 2 years, as the council struggles to find savings of £300 million. Now, this is in the context where, of course, councils and councillors are acutely aware of how the cost of living crisis is affecting so many of their residents. But we are in Tina land. There is no alternative. Councils, to keep meeting even their statutory requirements, the requirements that are to put on them by Westminster, about which they have no choices, councils are having to put those increases in. Now, I suspect in this debate, if one was to search the result of it, 1 in 5 is going to be the phrase that comes up most often. But I make no apologies for repeating the phrase, because 1 in 5 councils is at risk of going broke. That's 20% of councils in the country. This is an absolute crisis. And yet we have, with our media that's so focused on what happens, particularly down in the other place, but what happens here in Westminster, a media that really is focused on London is really failing to grasp the scale of the crisis around the country. And I'm afraid I don't think that the government has truly grasped the scale of the crisis either. And of course, I referred to the rising council tax. Of course, the proportion of money that councils have got from council tax has risen from 40% in 2009-10 to 60% now. Now, where else do councils get money from? Often they can charge for certain services, such as leisure centres and parking. They can generate income from sales of property, certain types of waste removal. We think about those services and we put that at the intersection of the cost of living crisis. Yes, you can increase the cost of the local swimming pool or the gym, but that means that more and more people will not be able to access it. We can think about the issue of sales of property, and yet we have seen, since the election of Margaret Thatcher, the sale of 50% of what was publicly owned land, a large amount at council land. And once it's sold, it's not coming back. You close the library, you sell the building and the land. It's not going to be when times get better you can bring it back. It's gone. And that library is so much a part of central meeting place, and even as technology changes, IT comes in, it's a public space that could have been dedicated to public purposes in the future, but we've just simply lost those spaces. Communities don't have places to gather anymore. And I think it's also worth highlighting, and I don't think anyone's really picked this up yet, but of course we've seen austerity right across central government, cuts in pays to civil service workers, cuts in the real level of benefits. That increases poverty, it increases ill health, that puts more pressure on councils to have to provide services like social care. So this is literally a downward spiral in which we are trapped. And I'm going to go to the library briefing because I think it is really worth looking at the list, and this picks up points from the Noble Lady Baroness Bull and others. Spending cuts from 2010-11 to 2019-20. Cultural and related services, 37%. Planning and development services, cuts of 37%. Non-school education. We keep talking about the need for skills, but non-school education, down 32%. Housing services, 25%. Highways and transport services, 24%, which picks up the point about potholes and the general state of the roads raised by the Noble Lady opposite. Environmental and regulatory services, down 10%, just at the point we're starting to realise what an incredibly parlous state our natural world is in and desperately needs to be boosted, both for its own right but also to improve public health. Now, many noble lords will have received the briefing from the National Council of Voluntary Associations, the NCVA, and I think this raises the important point that we think about the cuts to council services, so much lost, the libraries, the theatres, etc. But of course, funding that local councils have given to charities and community groups has also been slashed, and that again is cutting away at the basic standard of quality of life in our communities. Almost 3/4 of organisations are not receiving enough funding to meet the demand for the services they offer. Nearly 2 out of 5 organisations have reduced the number of people they are supporting. And when you think about the COVID pandemic, several people have referred to the loneliness pandemic, an ageing population, reducing the number of people being supported when it's clear that the need is actually increasing. Now, I want to come briefly to two final points. One is to say that council tax and business rates is obviously a broken, wildly out-of-date system. The Green Party has long held and continues to very strongly call for a land value tax, which would be levied on the annual value of land itself, excluding any structures or improvement. It follows good taxation practice. It will be cheap to collect and difficult to evade, and it would discourage the use of land for speculation. At the moment, land is an ideal speculative investment, and we can all, I'm sure, in our local communities point to examples where land is not being used well because someone's sitting on it just waiting for the value of it to go up. And the final point, very briefly, the Noble Lady Baroness Hanway talked about elections. Of course, it would be lovely to have democratic elections with a single transferable vote system or similar as they have in Scotland for local councils. It would be great to have local communities fully represented. It would be lovely to see them fully represented in the House of Commons. But what's interesting, it's worth noting, is there is a big shape-up happening in local councils, and we are seeing increasingly groups of different parties coming together to run councils. That's a really exciting development of change.